another car update. I won't bore people too much about these rear guards, but I've finished hammering those up now. They've come out reasonably well. We'll still need a skim of filler here and there, but generally that's done. I have to do the front ones next, obviously, but I want to look at mounting these rear guards and putting in the fillet piece which will go in there. And I was looking at how I could make the stays to hold these guards on, and Ian pointed out to me I can use that fillet piece to be the thing that actually bolts it all together, because if I cut out a triangular piece with a flange on this side and a flange on that side, I can bolt it between the wing and the body and use a bit of fender welt or sort of rubber strip in between the joins, and that should be more than strong enough to hold those in place. So I just have to figure out the best way to actually make those pieces. Obviously it's just going to be a curved piece with flanges bent on it, but I have to figure out the exact shape, and I'm not sure how to do that without using, more or less just using trial and error. One thing I will do to make that easier is I'm going to make some little wooden stands to ensure that I get both guards even. Especially when looking from the back, they have to be the exact same height and get all the spacings right and that kind of thing, and also get them centered properly in regards to the wheel to make sure everything's lined up. So that's the next job on the list for those. But I was getting a bit sick of doing guards, so I started doing some other things. I've been tweaking the bonnet, and I've got that to fit a lot better. It needed more bending in here to tighten this radius. So what I want to do next, I'm about to start doing, is cutting the little fingers out for making the hinge that runs along this bonnet line. So the way these bonnets are made is the hinge is all integral to the panels. So like this middle hinge here, there's no fasteners or anything, it all just sort of slots and slides together. So this side hinge will be done the same way. I also filed the edges of the bonnet. May need a little bit more. I can see it's not quite straight there, but I was trying to file those to get those square. One other small job I did is I used one of those battery conditioner boxes, and I did just have the wire hanging out of the top of the bonnet, which isn't going to work when I try to finish the bonnet off, of course. So I drilled a small hole in the battery compartment, or near the battery, through the firewall. So this is the connector that the cable that goes to the connector for that battery conditioner. Just a hole through the firewall, drilled that, put some paint on the edge, and then put a rubber grommet in there. So this is all looking okay. I do also want to look at rerouting the exhaust so that it comes out and down and under the car. Mainly because with the guards you can see there's not really any room for it. If I had the exhaust pipe going here, it's exactly where the passenger puts their arm when they're sitting in the car. So realistically, it's not a car you're going to be carrying passengers in that often, so they don't need a seat. Basically, there will just be a padded back on here, which keeps the passenger back and out of the way. It's all just extra weight you don't need. To get that fold in the bonnet, I do have a metal folder, but it's only 600mm long. So to be able to get some of those sharper folds, I did what we did way back when I first started on the car. Must be about 7 years ago when we made the valances. And to bend those, Josh showed me how to do this. You basically use a bar. I've got a piece of square tube here, and there are little spaces underneath it. That's 3mm steel spaces, so there's a slot under here. And you can just slide the panel in and then just bend it against this. It does flex a little bit, but it's not too bad, and it worked fairly well. Another job I mentioned I was going to do and never actually looked at. This is my little 12-ton shop press I was using for for various things. It's quite handy. I can't remember why I was wanting to fix it. I think it was because I wanted to try pressing the little metal plates that the things that mount the guards attach to. So it's a bit hard to explain, but I needed to press some steel basically. And one of the problems I've had on this is when I first got it, there's a huge gap in the sides here. So this would wobble sideways. And it always made me feel a bit unsafe when I was trying to press things, because you'd be pressing down and this whole thing could go sideways. So what I ended up doing was I made these plastic blocks that fitted in the ends of this to take up all that end play. And you can see these blocks are about half an inch thick, 10 millimeters, half an inch. So that was a lot of movement in there. So now with this is just, there's a big magnet inside there, so I can stick this to it. Now this, when it goes up and down, there's no sideways play at all. One thing I may do on this is machine up a little knob to go on this to make it easier to undo that, so you don't have to use the handle. I just find that annoying. Before fitting this, obviously over the travel of this, you want these arms to be parallel. So I just sort of cut this measuring stick and made it so the distance was equal all the way up and down. So that's much better. One thing I did notice though, once I'd actually squared it all up, is this is not straight at all. I mean, that's just ridiculous. So I don't know how I would fix that. I may remake this. I think what I'd have to do is, using a hole saw, drill through the top to drill around this, and then weld in a new beam, a new bar. But I mean, you can see how far off at a right angle, off being a right angle that is. That's just ridiculous. But these things are cheap, and like most cheap tools, you pay what you get what you pay for, but then you can modify them. So, you know, like I said, I was able to fix that, and that now works reasonably well for what I need. What else have we been doing? Work on the Riley has kind of stalled at the moment. I've cleaned things up. I painted the block. I think I'm going to paint up the front axle to get ready for rebuilding that. I think that's about the only thing I can still do, because with the lockdown, the steering column and steering column bits are all off being shortened, and the steering wheel center fixed. I did need to talk to someone in the local Riley club who was going to help me out with some of the clutch parts, so he may still be able to do that, even though we're all stuck at home. The wheels are off being rebuilt, so that's not going to happen for a while. And some engine covers and things were off being vapor blasted to clean them up. Mainly because I've always been interested to see how it works and how well it comes up. But there's a guy who does it locally, very locally. He only lives about 2 streets away, so that's quite convenient when you're actually allowed to go and visit people, which we can't. Another thing I did, which is completely not related to cars, is this is a sort of junction box. It's the sort of thing that lives up the top of power poles. It's all cast steel. It's very heavy. And there's a bit of a story behind this. Where I used to live up in Auckland, I used to catch the train home. And as I'd walk home, I always used to see this box sort of half dangling at the top of a power pole. It looked kind of abandoned, it was all rusty, but it looked really cool. I always just liked the look of it. So I used to kind of fantasize about how I could steal it, which obviously I wasn't going to do. I'm not going to climb up to the top of a power pole and rip something down. But then one day when I was walking home, there were some workmen up there. And that's exactly what they were doing. They were basically taking this down to replace it with some modern equivalent. They already had it down. It was just sitting on the ground. And I sort of said to the guys, "Oh, what are you going to do with that?" And they said, "Oh, just throw it away." I'm like, "Can I have that?" They're like, "Yeah, sure, no problem." So I got the thing. I didn't really know what I was going to do with it, but I decided to restore it all. I painted it up. I had to remake these little locking things. I had to redo the hinges. I've actually just put in little clevis pins instead of fixed hinges, and I just sort of painted it up. And I'm actually going to hang it outside. Oh, I don't think you can see out in my garden there, up on the fence. And I'll just keep my little gardening tools and like the little trowel and the little fork in there, and the slug pellets and things like that, just because it's a nice solid old box. But when I was doing this is one of the reasons you should always wear eye protection when you're drilling things out. So I had this bolted in the vise by this lug. So there's the vise there. So you can imagine this thing was sitting quite tall. And I was drilling out the broken hinge pins that were in here. And these turned out to be brass. So if you imagine, I'm sort of standing here with the drill up high, basically at eye level, drilling these things out, and being brass, the drill caught and shattered. The drill bit shattered. It was a 4mm drill bit. And I felt little bits of metal go flying everywhere, and I felt a bit of a sting on my arm and started bleeding. I didn't think too much of it. I went and put a sticking plaster on it and then came back and finished what I was doing. Next morning, I sort of woke up, my arm was still a bit sore, and I thought that's a bit odd. And I sort of prodded around, and under the skin I could feel something hard. So I dug around a bit. I don't think this is, will it focus on it? I dug around a little bit. Let's see. There we go. And I ended up having to use a pair of tweezers, and I pulled this out from underneath the skin. It was fully embedded. There was just 0.5 millimeter or so sticking out. So yeah, I had to dig that out. Basically, you can see it's like a claw or something, razor sharp, and that had gone straight into my arm, which when I'd been drilling was kind of up at this height, which is exactly at eye height. So you could see why if something like that goes wrong and you're not wearing safety glasses and one of those goes into your eye, you'd be in trouble. So luckily that all ended fine. What else did I do? Since I've been hammering a lot, I've got all my dollies and bits and pieces out. When you get into the sort of metalworking stuff, you end up looking for any sort of suitable bits of metal that you can use as a dolly. All sorts of things work. That's just a slab of steel, which is quite handy because it's got lots of right angles. I've got my chunk of railway line there, which is very handy. One thing I was missing was a spherical type dolly. Now, Joss up in Auckland has a really handy steel ball, about this size. I think it's a cannonball, which was really useful and quite handy for doing things like the little rounded bit on the point of the tail there. Now, I didn't have anything I could use, but I remembered what I do have was these stainless steel balls. I had 2 of these. These were cheap from China. They're hollow. I used one on the Van de Graaff machine I built as the second smaller electrode. So I had an idea. One of my terrible habits, which I've had for years, is whenever I see wheel weights on the road, these things, I have to stop and pick them up. Like I say, I've been doing it for years, and I ended up with quite a collection of them, which over time I ended up melting down. So these are lead blocks. They were cast in a muffin pan. So I thought, well, why not make a dolly by drilling a hole in the hollow stainless steel ball and filling it up with lead, which is basically what I did. You can see the hole there where I filled it up. So now that's a very hefty, solid metal weight. Now, one thing is you can hear that rattling. The lead, when it cools, shrinks. And so there must be a little bit of a gap in there. Oh, it stopped doing it now. But I've played with this and I've used it, and it actually works reasonably well. It's just a nice solid heavy weight that you can put behind a panel and then hammer against. I think that's about it for the car at the moment. Like I say, I'm sort of trying to focus on the little Austin there to get that done while I'm waiting for all these different Riley bits and pieces. I do have to even out the hammering. When I say even out, I mean space it out. So it's just so much work, and I'm so unused to it. I have to do a bit of hammering one day and then have a rest the next day, because I found my hand was getting really sore and feeling bruised all through there. And I think part of that's just I don't know how to hold the tools properly, so I've loosened my grip a lot, and that helped. I've just been changing the way I've been doing things, and it's definitely helping. But also to spare the neighbours, because of course everyone's stuck at home. So, you know, if you're making too much noise, there's just so many people around to be bothered by it. So I'm very conscious of not being too noisy. Supposedly it's not too noisy when I've got the doors shut and I'm hammering away, but it can't be pleasant. Of course, I don't know what it sounds like because I can't hammer and go outside and listen at the same time. But like I say, I try not to do too much of that. And to be honest, I can only do a couple of hours at a time, and then I'm just too tired. I'm not sure how long it's going to take me to do the front guards. The biggest difficulty with doing these is they're just really awkward to handle. So I may have to set up some sort of stand or jig or something to help me do that. To be able to do these, what I ended up doing was actually gripping it in the vise on the sides here, just between two blocks of wood, and I was able to hold it in the vise and sort of tilt it up to the angle I wanted, and then go over and smooth it out. So yeah, that's more or less where that's at now. So I'm going to go ahead and start working on the bonnet, I think, because that's reasonably quiet. This is another one of the small jobs I've been meaning to do for a long time that I was finally able to get done. This is just a little clamp that holds the if we can see it, sort of down in there, which I won't focus on. There's the end of the shaft for the thing with the horn button. There's that shaft that goes all the way down there, and this just clamps on the end of that shaft and keeps this in place. It's quite nice having a lathe and a mill now. I mean, you could make things like this by hand, no problem, but with the lathe and the mill you can make them look nice. So I'll just clamp that in place, and then that's another little job done. So now you can see the little clamp down there on the bottom of the steering box. I've connected up the wires, which means now I should have a working horn.